Picture this. A torch leaves a soldier's hand and does not hesitate. It arcs through the air and crashes through the stained glass of St. Mark's Hospital. In seconds, the roof becomes an inferno. Inside, people scream and run. Outside, there is no emotion, only cold calculation. It is September 23rd. Yitan Wu by Arshizhou, and Vienna's defenders are not fighting the Ottomans yet. They are fighting their own geography. The order has been shouted down the line, scorched earth. Burn the vineyards. Burn the estates. Burn the hospitals. As smoke chokes the sun and turns noon into gray twilight, the logic becomes clear. This is not vandalism. It is survival. 16,000 defenders are trapping themselves in a stone cage to face the most terrifying war machine of the age. The siege begins not with a cannon shot, but with the city tearing off its own skin so the enemy has no cover. Before we dive into this last stand, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, what is the most desperate siege in history that deserves a documentary? Because the smoke rising from Vienna is the only warning Europe gets, and a landslide is already moving up the Danube. Stay with this. Hold that thought. And winter is coming. The next hour decides everything. Keep listening, because the siege isn't done, and the ground is still moving. The city is still burning. The drums do not stop. The tunnel is still breathing. Marching toward Vienna is Suleiman the Magnificent, and he is not bringing a raid. He is bringing a migration. Estimates put his force around 120,000 men, janissaries drilling in mud, Sipahi cavalry sharpening lances, and irregular akinjis swarming the countryside to burn whatever the defenders missed. His goal is simple and symbolic: the golden apple, Vienna. Take it, and the gateway to Western Europe swings open. But Suleiman arrives with a problem that no commander can bribe or threaten the calendar. The summer of 1529 is a nightmare of rain. Week after week, the Balkans turn to glue. Roads dissolve into rivers of sludge. This is not wet boots, it is logistical collapse. The mud swallows the Ottoman army's greatest weapon, the heavy siege bombards, the wall smashers that could have shattered Vienna in a day. Those bronze monsters must be abandoned far behind. Suleiman reaches the gates, angry and late, forced to rely on lighter guns. And inside the walls, Vienna's math is worse: medieval curtains of thin stone, built for ladders and knights, not gunpowder. 16,000 men look out at the horizon and understand one brutal fact: their walls are old, and the enemy is modern. Stay with this. Hold that thought. And winter is coming. The next hour decides everything. Keep listening, because the siege isn't done, and the ground is still moving. The city is still burning. The drums do not stop. The tunnel is still breathing. Vienna's council panics. Citizens hoard food. Officials argue. Then a 70-year-old mercenary veteran steps into the noise and turns it into work: Count Nicholas Salm. He looks at Vienna's tall, thin medieval walls and knows they will not hold against sustained bombardment. even with lighter Ottoman artillery. So he orders the city to change shape. Streets are ripped up, pavement stones are torn from the ground and stacked to reinforce ramparts. A secondary wooden barrier is built behind the stone wall like a cushion, meant to catch debris when cannonballs start biting. Salm doesn't fund this with speeches. He melts down his own family's silver to pay troops and labor. As Ottoman vanguard units crest the hills, the view is chilling. A white tent city blooms around Vienna, wrapping it in a suffocating crescent. The march's silence is replaced by drums and cymbals. Salm stands on improvised defenses gripping his sword. The suburbs are ash. The big cannons are missing. The season is turning. The first shot is coming. And to understand why the defenders have even a ghost of a chance, we have to step outside the walls and into the Ottoman camp, into a machine that looks unstoppable, even when it is limping. Stay with this. Hold that thought. And winter is coming. The next hour decides everything. Keep listening. Because the siege isn't done. And the ground is still moving. The city is still burning. The drums do not stop. The tunnel is still breathing. Step into Suleiman's royal tent, and you enter a world that feels unreal compared to the freezing quagmire outside. Silk walls hold musk and rosewater. Gold thread glitters in candlelight. This is the mobile palace of the shadow of God on earth, the 10th Ottoman Sultan, a man who can wear a helmet shaped like a papal tiara just to mock Europe. Suleiman is not merely a warlord. He is poet, goldsmith, lawgiver, and conqueror, the apex of Ottoman power up to that moment. And yet, as he studies Vienna's walls and listens to the wet wind outside, he knows the truth his poets will not write. The campaign is already a disaster. The road from Istanbul is nearly 1,000 miles of rain and rot. The Balkans' roads dissolve into sludge that turns speed into a crawl. Pack animals die by the thousands. Camels, built for dry heat, rot in constant moisture, slip, break legs, and drown in mire. Soldiers die of dysentery and exposure. And the consequence is strategic catastrophe. The great bombards, the siege breakers that shattered roads in Belgrade are stuck behind like anchors. Suleiman chose speed over waiting, and now he arrives at his greatest prize with one hand tied. He must win with fear, numbers, and engineering, before winter and hunger win against him. Stay with this. Hold that thought. And winter is coming. The next hour decides everything. Keep listening, because the siege isn't done, and the ground is still moving. The city is still burning. The drums do not stop. The tunnel is still breathing, even without the heavy guns. The Ottoman camp is a terrifying sight. From Vienna's ramparts, it looks like a city that grew overnight. Miles of white tents arranged in strict geometric order. European camps often reek of drunken brawls and chaos. Ottoman observers note something worse, a silence that feels controlled. Units know their places. Sanitation is managed. Supply lines, strained but functioning, still move. It is an army behaving like a state. At the center of that state stand the Janissaries, the pure element of discipline in this story. They are the Sultan's household infantry, recruited through the Devshirme boys taken from Christian families, converted, trained, and raised with loyalty to no one but Suleiman. They are forbidden to marry or trade while in service. War is their family. The regiment is their home. In 1529, they are among the finest infantry on earth, armed with matchlock arquebuses that can punch through plate. They pace muddy lines outside Vienna, eager and frustrated, powder damp, fingers numb, time slipping away. Suleiman knows he cannot starve Vienna out. He does not have the season. He cannot smash the walls quickly. He does not have the bombards. So he sends an emissary with the standard offer of the age, made lethal by who speaks it. Surrender now and be spared. Resist, and the city will be given to the sackmen killed, women and children enslaved, Vienna erased. Inside, Salm and the council read it. Look at smoke rising from burned suburbs, and answer not with ink, but with iron. Stay with this. Hold that thought. And winter is coming. The next hour decides everything. Keep listening, because the siege isn't done, and the ground is still moving. Vienna's reply is a roar. Cannon fire erupts from the walls, tearing into Ottoman lines like a defiant scream. Negotiation ends. Suleiman, watching from silk, likely feels anger and respect in the same breath. He nods to commanders. If they cannot knock the walls down, they will go under them. Miners are ordered forward. The war for Vienna is about to become a war underground. Inside the city, the defenders are a strange mix. Among the most important are the Landsknechts, German mercenaries as famous for skill as for spectacle. If Janissaries are warrior monks, Landsknechts are warrior rock stars. They wield the Zweihander, a massive two-handed sword, and dress like a riot-slashed doublets, grotesque codpieces, hats with feathers. They drink, gamble, and brag. They live by a motto that sounds like a threat. No money, no German. They fight for coin, not for Habsburg glory. 3 days before the siege, they almost walk out. Vienna's treasury is empty. Burghers hide wealth in cellars. Landsknecht captains look at crumbling walls, then at the Ottoman Sea, then at empty purses, and mutiny begins to form. This is where Salm wins before the first breach. He knows you cannot eat patriotism. He strips his own estate of heirlooms, plates, goblets, candelabras, melts them, mints them into coin, and pays the mercenaries with his family's silver. The peacocks pick up swords. The mutiny dissolves. And now, Salm turns to his other nightmare walls, built for a medieval world about to be crushed by gunpowder. Stay with this. Hold that thought. And winter is coming. The next hour decides everything. Keep listening, because the siege isn't done, and the ground is still moving. The city is still burning. The drums do not stop. In 1529, Vienna is a medieval death trap. Its fortifications are centuries out of date tall, thin stone curtains meant to stop ladders and rams. In the age of cannon, a high, thin wall doesn't hold its shatters. Modern fortresses are low, thick, angled starworks built to deflect shots. Vienna does not have them. Salm must improvise a revolution in days. He cannot rebuild the walls, so he reinforces them. Citizens tear up paving stones and stack them into inner ramparts. Roofs are stripped to reduce fires. Defensive ditches are dug behind the walls and packed with earth. Timber braces are erected. It is a crumple zone. Like a car built to absorb impact, Salm expects the outer stone to fail. He plans for what happens after. When the Ottomans smash through, they will not find clean streets to rush. They will find a second wall of earth and wood bristling with pikes and arquebuses. Vienna becomes an onion, layers of nasty surprises. He seals the city like a box. Gates are not merely locked, they are walled up with masonry. No sorting. No fleeing. No surrender. The silver is spent. Streets turn to bare earth. On the ramparts, landsknechts in bright rags stand beside frightened militia. Outside, Ottoman miners dig like moles in wet soil. The waiting is torture, but it won't last. Light Ottoman guns are dragged into position. Orders are shouted in Turkish. Fuses are lit. And the First Siege of Vienna is about to shift from construction to slaughter because the hardest weapon in this siege is not iron. It is sound. Stay with this. Hold that thought. And winter is coming. The next hour decides everything. Keep listening, because the siege isn't done, and the ground is still moving. Ask a defender of Vienna what broke men fastest, and many would not say hunger or wounds. They would say noise. Vienna becomes a psychological torture chamber orchestrated by sound before stone even breaks. The Ottoman military band, the Meter, fills the air with alien thunder, huge kettle drums beating like a giant heart, cymbals clashing, and the shrill scream of reed pipes. The point is not music. The point is sleeplessness. The Ottomans play in shifts, day and night, hammering nerves so defenders cannot rest, cannot think, cannot forget who surrounds them. Under this wall of sound, bombardment begins. Even without the heavy bombards, Ottoman field guns establish batteries on high ground and chip the brittle masonry hour after hour. Dust chokes streets. Stone splinters and shrapnel cut men on the ramparts. Salm understands a brutal principle of siege warfare. Passive defense is slow suicide. You must disrupt the attacker's rhythm. You must make them fear the dark. On October 6th, he authorizes a major sortie. Gates are unsealed, masonry briefly cleared, and roughly 8,000 defenders, many landsknechts and heavy cavalry, surge out like a cornered animal biting back. The target is Ottoman mining operations near vulnerable gates. The fight is not elegant. It is a brawl in mud, plate-armored Europeans crashing into lighter troops. Pikes stabbing at close range. Arquebus fire flashing. For an hour, trenches become slaughter. The defenders torch shafts, kill diggers, and drag wounded back inside before janissaries push them away. The mood shifts. Vienna has drawn blood. The invincible host can bleed. But the sortie reveals the terror up close the enemy's scale. Half the garrison left the city, and what shoved them back was only a fraction of Ottoman reserves. Then the drums fade, and another sound returns, quieter and worse faint scratching beneath cellar floors. Because cannons and sorties are distractions. The real war is happening 20 feet underground. Stay with this. Hold that thought. And winter is coming. The siege becomes subterranean, while guns thunder above. The true battle for Vienna moves into a world of absolute darkness, candle smoke, and suffocating air. Frustrated by the failure of light artillery, Suleiman turns to his most dangerous specialists, sappers, engineers of destruction. Their job is simple: dig a tunnel under Vienna's foundations, pack a chamber with powder, and blow the wall open from below. Sam knows it is coming. He recruits the best miners he can find, rough men from Bohemian silver mines, used to living where sunlight never reaches. These miners become Vienna's hidden defense system. But how do you fight an enemy you cannot see? How do you find a tunnel before it kills you? The answer is low-tech terror. Defenders place drums on cellar floors near the walls, sprinkle dry peas or beans on the stretched skins, and set buckets of water at intervals. Then they watch. If peas dance or water ripples, it means digging is happening directly beneath them. When the peas move, the counterattack begins. Bohemian miners dig their own tunnel, aiming to intercept the Ottoman shaft. Imagine the breakthrough moment you're crawling in a cramped tube barely wide enough for shoulders, lungs burning, ears straining. Your pick punches through, and the earth collapses into empty space. Suddenly, you are face to face with an Ottoman sapper holding a candle and a shovel, eyes wide in flickering light. There is no room for swords. Men fight with pickaxes, hammers, knives. They grapple in mud, choke on dust, strangle in darkness. A candle can betray you. A spark can ignite powder. Every breath is borrowed. This is the War of the Moles, and it decides whether Vienna's onion defenses ever get tested above ground, or whether the wall simply erupts from underneath, turning stone into shrapnel and streets into graves. And here is the cliff edge. Underground combat is silent to the world above until the moment it isn't. One successful mine can end the siege in a heartbeat. One successful interception can buy Vienna another week closer to winter. The only ally the defenders truly trust. The peas are watching. The water is waiting. Somewhere below, a pick is already swinging. Stay with this. Hold that thought. And winter is coming. Suleiman is now racing two enemies at once, Vienna's defenders and the weather. Nights grow longer. Forage runs thin. Powder stays damp. He cannot starve the city for months, and he cannot smash it quickly without the big guns. So he leans harder on fear and engineering, throwing men into tunnels and assaults because the calendar is tightening like a noose. Inside Vienna, Salm's entire plan is to survive long enough for that noose to choke the besiegers instead. He has sealed gates, built inner ramparts, and paid mercenaries with melted silver. But none of that matters if the defenders lose nerve. That is why every successful countermine, every burned shaft, every sortie is more than tactics. It is psychology. It tells starving citizens and hard-drinking landsknechts that resistance is not just brave, it is possible. And yet the city is still a cage. Food disappears. Fear spreads like smoke. The meter drums keep pounding. Cannonballs keep chipping. Bodies keep piling. A single breach can become a flood. A single mine can turn an entire bastion into a crater. Psalm stands on the ramparts at 70 years old and knows his world has narrowed to one question. Can he keep 16,000 people disciplined inside panic long enough to make the Sultan quit? Because that is the real miracle of Qaim. Itian Wubai Arshijo. It is not that Christians are braver than Ottomans. It is that a small garrison holds together under conditions designed to dissolve humans. No sleep, no certainty, no rescue, only procedure repair at night, fire by day. Listen underground, and pay the men who might otherwise mutiny. So if you're wondering how 16,000 defenders stopped Suleiman, the answer is not one heroic duel. It is 1,000 ugly decisions made correctly while the world shakes. And the next phase of this siege will test the city's nerves to the breaking point, because once the mines get close enough, every cellar becomes a battlefield, and every footstep above could be the last sound you ever hear. Stay with this. Hold that thought. And winter is coming. If the defenders won the tunnel war, they flooded the shaft or collapsed it with timber props. If they lost, the fuse was lit and the city would tear open like a wound. On October 9th, the peas in the cellars stopped dancing, and then the ground simply heaved. Ottoman sappers had bypassed the counterminers near the Corinthian gate. A blast ripped through the earth and sky at once, hurling tons of stone and soil upward in a gray geyser. Men were knocked flat, hundreds of yards away. For a heartbeat there was stunned silence, as dust hung like fog, thick enough to taste. Then the cloud thinned, and the defenders saw it a breach. A section of wall had collapsed into a jagged ramp of rubble leading straight into Vienna. This was the moment Suleiman had been waiting for. He signaled, and the Janissaries rose and moved. The defenders finally saw them in full fury, not a disorganized mob, but a white-capped wave advancing with terrifying speed and precision, rushing to seize the opening before the dust even settled. But Psalm had planned for failure. That is what the inner defenses were for. As Janissaries scrambled up sliding rock, losing footing on loose scree, they met a wall of Zweihanders. Landsknechts waded into the narrow choke point, their two-handed blades shearing spears and limbs in the confined space, while Ottoman arquebuses fired point-blank into the mass. Two philosophies collided in a tunnel-made doorway, Eastern discipline and fanatic precision against Western heavy metal aggression. Hour after hour, the breach became a meat grinder of corpses, and neither side gave ground until the Ottoman surge finally recoiled. Vienna held, but the psychological seal was gone. Now every step felt unsafe, because the next mine could explode anywhere. Hold that thought. Winter is tightening the noose. And the next sound matters, because the ground is still moving. No one sleeps in a city like this. The calendar is a weapon, and the walls are listening. After the breach fight, the defenders stared at the rubble that used to be their rampart and understood the terrifying truth. The ground beneath their feet was no longer trustworthy. Mines could bloom under any street, any cellar, any tower. And by the second week of October, the Ottomans faced a new enemy, more ruthless than any man on a wall, with a pike, the sky. Armies run on stomachs and morale, not speeches. Outside Vienna, both were freezing to death. On October 11th, the rain that had dogged the campaign turned into snow. For Vienna, it felt like a miracle. For Suleiman, it was a logistical death sentence. His army was built for summer campaigning, dressed from Mediterranean heat silk, cotton, lighter layers, nothing meant for an Austrian winter. The pristine white tents became islands in a sea of frozen sludge. Men woke with frost-bitten fingers. Pack animals that had survived the wet simply lay down in the snow and refused to rise. Dysentery and typhus began to reap more lives than Christian cannon ever could. The stench unburied bodies, rotting carcasses, open latrines grew so strong that chroniclers claimed it drifted inside the walls. Worst of all, the janissaries began to murmur. They were professionals with power. They knew you do not fight a winter siege with damp powder and mud that kills momentum. Why are we dying for a city we cannot eat? Suleiman heard the whispers and understood the danger. A sultan who pushes janissaries too far can end up dead. Stay with the story. Hold that thought. Winter is tightening the noose. And the next sound matters. Because the ground is still moving. No one sleeps in a city like this. The calendar is a weapon, and the walls are listening. Suleiman realized he had run out of time. The siege was failing, and the weather was stripping away the aura of invincibility that had carried him across Europe. He faced two choices: retreat in disgrace, or gamble everything on one last assault. He chose the gamble. On October 12th, he convened a war council and laid out the offer: one final all-out attack. Not probing raids, not mines, but a human wave aimed at the broken sections near the Corinthian gate to motivate freezing. Exhausted troops, he did not appeal to poetry or prophecy. He appealed to greed. He promised that if Vienna fell, the ordinary rules of booty would be suspended. Promotions would rain down. Rewards would be astronomical. Winner takes all. The date was set for October 14th. Inside Vienna, Sama watched the snowfall and the movement in the Ottoman camp. He saw janissaries massing not in shifts, but in total. He saw mining pause and bombardment change tone. The enemy was coiling like a fist. Salm checked his own line's starving men. Raw nerves. Walls reduced to rubble piles. He knew the winter executioner had forced the Sultan's hand. The next 24 hours would decide not only Vienna, but the balance of Central Europe. And the defenders understood the sick joke the city had survived because it burned its suburbs. And now it might die because it cannot burn the enemy's hunger away. Stay with the story. Hold that thought. Winter is tightening the noose. And the next sound matters. Because the ground is still moving. No one sleeps in a city like this. The calendar is a weapon. And the walls are listening. Dawn on October 14th. Itzen Wubai Arschitzel breaks with a sound that shakes the last glass from Vienna's windows. It is not thunder. It is every remaining Ottoman cannon firing in unison. Then comes a silence that feels worse because it is the inhale before the scream. As smoke clears, a human roar rises from thousands of throats. Suleiman keeps his word. He throws everything at the breaches near the Corinthian gate. This is not a maneuver. It is blunt force trauma. White-capped janissaries surge forward in dense ranks, climbing over bodies sunk in mud, scrambling up loose scree, shouting the name of God. In the choke point, Salm packs lanzknechts and Spanish arquebusiers into a solid block of steel. As the first wave crests the rubble, it meets a point-blank volley of lead. The front rank simply evaporates. But the men behind do not stop. They push forward, driven by winter desperation and fear of their sultan. The breach is too narrow for formations, so it becomes a crushing mosh pit of death. Long pikes become useless. Men drop them and fight with short swords, daggers, even rocks. The noise is wet and close steel on bone, boots slipping, men suffocating against each other. This is where the defense almost breaks, because no wall is stronger than exhausted hands. Stay with the story. Hold that thought. Winter is tightening the noose, and the next sound matters, because the ground is still moving. No one sleeps in a city like this. The calendar is a weapon, and the walls are listening. In the heart of the crush, Count Nicholas Salm pays the price. The 70-year-old commander is everywhere shouting orders, plugging gaps, dragging men back into line. Then a piece of falling masonry, or a cannon fragment, strikes his hip. Accounts differ, but the result is the same. He collapses in agony. For a moment, that fall could have routed the defenders. Instead, it enrages them. Landsknechts see the man who melted his own silver to pay them bleeding in the mud, and they fight with savage fury. They form a hedgehog of pikes around his body and shove back the janissary mass with raw force. Outside, the Ottoman assault begins to falter. Janissaries are exhausted. Robes are heavy with freezing mud. Damp powder makes weapons unreliable. Their scimitars are deadly in open space, but useless against a bristling wall of pikes in a narrow breach. And the promised riches start to look like a lie. There is no gold here, only cold steel and bodies. Slowly, agonizingly, the tide turns. Cries of victory become screams of pain, and then the order to retreat. Janissaries slide back down the debris, slipping in blood and slush. By early afternoon, silence returns to the gate. The breach is packed with corpses so high they form a new rampart. Vienna still stands, but the mood is not joy. Salm is carried away, pale and shaking. He will linger, but in truth, the old mercenary dies on the wall that day, even if his heart beats a little longer. Stay with the story. Hold that thought. Winter is tightening the noose, and the next sound matters, because the ground is still moving. No one sleeps in a city like this. The calendar is a weapon, and the walls are listening. Suleiman watches the retreat from his vantage point and does not rage. He does not order another assault. He turns away. That calm is its own confession the gamble failed. Victory in medieval war rarely looks like parades. In Vienna, on October 15th, it looks like smoke, confusion, and men too tired to celebrate. Snow falls thicker now, burying dead janissaries in white shrouds. Suleiman makes the only rational decision: left retreat. But an Ottoman retreat is not simply turning around. It is a massive logistical uncoiling. And here, the siege shifts from military conflict to human tragedy. The army must lighten its load to escape mud and hunger. Anything that cannot walk is left behind. The Ottomans have baggage that can walk thousands of prisoners taken by Akinjis during the March peasants. Farmers, women, children, living booty, intended for slave markets. In freezing October, those captives turn from assets into liabilities, mouths to feed, slow feet in sludge. Suleiman issues an order that stains his legacy: leave nothing behind. Not freedom destruction. Fires erupt across the camp as tents and excess gear are burned. Then the screaming begins. Defeated and freezing, soldiers turn fury on captives, herding them into flames or cutting them down where they stand. Vienna's defenders, who held off the greatest army on earth, stand helpless as their own countrymen are slaughtered just beyond arrow range. It is the final psychological wound inflicted on a city that refused to fall. Stay with the story. Hold that thought. Winter is tightening the noose, and the next sound matters, because the ground is still moving. No one sleeps in a city like this. The calendar is a weapon, and the walls are listening. When the last Ottoman columns vanish into mist down the Danube, they leave a ring of fire and corpses. Inside Vienna, there is no wild cheering. Church bells ring, yes, but over a half-ruined city that is starving and traumatized. Gates are unblocked, and scouts ride out into the silent enemy camp. They find charred remains and the scale of the massacre. They also notice what is missing: the heavy equipment that never arrived. Only then do many Viennese understand how close they came to annihilation. If rain had not swallowed the big cannons, those fires outside would have been the city itself. Suleiman writes later with cold spin, framing retreat as a successful chastisement of infidels, not defeat. But Europe knows the truth. The tide hit rock, and the rock held. When snow melts in spring 1530, Vienna is free, but it has lost its father. Psalm's wound festers. In an age without antibiotics, shattered bone is a slow sentence. The mercenary who liquefied his legacy to buy loyalty dies in May 1530 and is buried in St. Stephen's Cathedral. His tomb does not show a saint. It shows a soldier, grim and resolute, the man who drew a line in mud the Ottoman Empire could not cross. And Saum's death forces the real question: what did his stubbornness save beyond one city? Because if Vienna falls in 1529, the map of the Western world changes. Not maybe, almost certainly. Stay with the story. Hold that thought. Winter is tightening the noose. And the next sound matters. Because the ground is still moving. No one sleeps in a city like this. The calendar is a weapon. And the walls are listening. Zoom out to 1529, and the stakes sharpen. The Protestant Reformation is still young. Martin Luther has cracked the Catholic world in Germany. The Holy Roman Empire is fractured, fighting a civil war of ideas. If Vienna falls, the road into the German heartlands opens. Ottoman armies pour into a divided region where princes cannot agree on a prayer, much less a defense. In that scenario, the Reformation might be crushed not by the Pope, but by the Sultan. Protestant rulers, suddenly fighting for survival against an Islamic superpower, might be forced into desperate reunification with Catholic authority or total subjugation. The religious diversity that shapes modern Europe could die in its cradle. For Suleiman, failure at Vienna is a bruise, not a death blow. Back in Istanbul, victory parades are staged. Official stories claim a triumphant raid and a merciful decision to spare the city for later. But the courts of Europe feel the shift. The spell is broken. The Ottomans are not demons. They are men who can starve, freeze, and bleed. The Siege of 1529 becomes a limit marker, the high water of a tide that will not rise this far again for generations. Vienna's leaders do not rest. They look at their thin medieval curtains and swear never again. Reconstruction begins immediately. Old walls are torn down and replaced by thick, angled bastions in the Italian-style fortifications designed for gunpowder. The First Siege is a victory of improvisation, a 70-year-old mercenary, wit Landsknechts, stubborn militia, and a whole lot of mud. But it teaches a lesson colder than heroism the West can stand. If it is willing to burn its own suburbs and fund its own defenses before the enemy arrives. Stay with the story. Hold that thought. Winter is tightening the noose. And the next sound matters. Because the ground is still moving. No one sleeps in a city like this. The calendar is a weapon. And the walls are listening. Walk through Vienna today, and you still walk on the footprint of 1529. The Great Ringstrasse, the circular boulevard lined with palaces and museums, traces the line of old walls and the cleared kill zone, psalm-ordered stripped by fire. The modern city is shaped by a scar from the Ottoman invasion. That is why it is dangerous to treat history as inevitable. We assume the West would always rise. The Ottomans would always stop. The map would always look familiar. 1529 proves the opposite. Civilization hangs by threads. The First Siege of Vienna was not decided by destiny. It was decided by a rainy summer that turned roads to glue. It was decided by mud that swallowed cannons. It was decided by an early snow that poisoned morale. It was decided by a commander who melted his silverware rather than surrender, and by mercenaries who stayed because they were paid. Change one variable, 1 week less rain, one mine a few yards over, one day, more campaigning weather, and the call to prayer might have echoed from St. Stephen's Cathedral for the next 500 years. The defenders did not know they were saving Western civilization. They were trying to survive until the snow fell. But the story does not end there. The Ottomans retreat. Yes, but they do not forget. For 150 years, Istanbul watches the golden apple and remembers the taste of failure. In 1683, they return with a force far larger, and Europe will need a miracle on horseback. Hold that in your mind, because this siege is the prologue to an even bigger one. Stay with the story. Hold that. Picture this. A torch leaves a soldier's hand and does not hesitate. It arcs through the air and crashes through the stained glass of St. Mark's Hospital. In seconds, the roof becomes an inferno. Inside, people scream and run. Outside, there is no emotion, only cold calculation. It is September 23rd. Wu by Architeau, and Vienna's defenders are not fighting the Ottomans yet. They are fighting their own geography. The order has been shouted down the line, scorched earth. Burn the vineyards. Burn the estates. Burn the hospitals. As smoke chokes the sun and turns noon into gray twilight, the logic becomes clear. This is not vandalism. It is survival. 16,000 defenders are trapping themselves in a stone cage to face the most terrifying war machine of the age. The siege begins not with a cannon shot, but with the city tearing off its own skin so the enemy has no cover. Before we dive into this last stand, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, what is the most desperate siege in history that deserves a documentary? Because the smoke rising from Vienna is the only warning Europe gets, and a landslide is already moving up the Danube. Stay with this. Hold that thought. And winter is coming. The next hour decides everything. Keep listening, because the siege isn't done, and the ground is still moving. The city is still burning. The drums do not stop. The tunnel is still breathing. Marching toward Vienna is Suleiman the Magnificent, and he is not bringing a raid. He is bringing a migration. Estimates put his force around 120,000 men, janissaries drilling in mud, Sipahi cavalry sharpening lances, and irregular Akinjis swarming the countryside to burn whatever the defenders missed. His goal is simple and symbolic: the golden apple, Vienna. Take it, and the gateway to Western Europe swings open. But Suleiman arrives with a problem that no commander